Today, we will talk about the negotiations between Iran and America and the main conditions that the United States puts forward in these talks. The United States has clearly stated several strict goals, especially related to Iran's nuclear and security policies. The most important demand is that Iran must limit its nuclear program in such a way that it can never develop nuclear weapons. This includes reducing uranium enrichment to very low levels, stopping high-level enrichment completely, and accepting strict monitoring by the International Atomic Energy Agency so that international inspectors can freely check Iran's nuclear facilities. Along with this, America also wants Iran to place restrictions on its ballistic missile program because long-range missiles are seen as a serious threat to regional security and to U.S. allies, especially Israel. Another major demand is that Iran should stop supporting proxy groups in the Middle East, such as Hezbollah and the Houthis, which, according to the United States, contribute to instability and conflict in the region. In addition, economic sanctions play a very important role in these negotiations. For many years, America has imposed strong financial and oil-related sanctions on Iran, and it has made it clear that these sanctions will only be lifted if Iran agrees to these conditions and follows them honestly. The United States also believes that negotiations should not be limited only to nuclear issues. It wants to include topics like regional security, human rights, military development, and Iran's overall foreign policy, because, in America's view, focusing only on the nuclear program is not enough to solve all problems. On the other hand, Iran considers many of these demands a violation of its national rights, especially its right to peaceful nuclear technology and self-defense. Iran often refuses to make major compromises on its missile program and nuclear activities, which makes negotiations difficult and slow. Because of these disagreements, talks between the two countries often face delays and tensions. Overall, the main objective of American conditions is to ensure that Iran never becomes a nuclear-armed state, changes its military and regional behavior, accepts international supervision, and in return receives economic relief. The United States believes that this approach is necessary for long-term peace, stability, and security in the Middle East. Today, we will discuss the conditions of Iran in the negotiations with the United States, the locations where these talks are being held, and the countries that support and encourage these negotiations. Relations between Iran and America have remained tense for many years, mainly because of Iran's nuclear program, economic sanctions, and regional security issues. For this reason, whenever negotiations take place, they are considered very sensitive and important for regional and global stability. First, it is important to understand Iran's main conditions in these talks. Iran clearly states that negotiations should be limited only to nuclear issues and the removal of economic sanctions. According to Iran, its nuclear program is peaceful and is meant only for energy production, medical research, and scientific development. Therefore, Iran demands that the United States and its allies recognize its right to peaceful nuclear technology. One of Iran's biggest demands is the complete lifting of economic sanctions, especially those related to oil exports, banking, and international trade. These sanctions have badly affected Iran's economy, currency, and living standards, so Iran considers their removal a top priority. Another important Iranian condition is that its defensive and military programs, especially its ballistic missile program, should not be included in the negotiations. Iran argues that missiles are necessary for its national security and self-defense, especially in a region where many countries possess advanced weapons. Similarly, Iran refuses to discuss its support for regional groups and allies in countries like Lebanon, Yemen, and Syria, claiming that this support is part of its regional security strategy. For Iran, these issues are red lines and are not open for compromise. Regarding the location of the talks, Iran and the United States usually do not hold direct negotiations. Instead, discussions are mostly indirect and conducted through mediators. In recent years, Oman has played a key role as a neutral mediator between the two sides. Many important rounds of talks have taken place in Muscat, the capital of Oman. Sometimes, negotiations have also been held in European cities such as Vienna and Austria, especially during discussions related to the nuclear agreement. These neutral locations are chosen to provide a calm and diplomatic environment where both sides feel comfortable. Several countries strongly support and encourage negotiations between Iran and the United States. European countries such as France, Germany, and the United Kingdom are among the most active supporters. These countries were also part of the original nuclear deal and want to prevent nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. They believe that dialogue is better than conflict and that diplomacy can reduce tensions. Russia and China also support negotiations, mainly because they have economic and strategic relations with Iran and want regional stability. In addition, countries in the Middle East such as Qatar, Turkey, and Oman actively promote dialogue between Iran and the United States. These countries fear that a military conflict between Iran and America would seriously damage regional peace, trade, and security. Therefore, they often act as mediators or facilitators. International organizations, especially the United Nations and the International Atomic Energy Agency, also support these talks and provide technical and monitoring assistance. Overall, Iran's main conditions in the negotiations focus on protecting its nuclear rights, lifting economic sanctions, keeping its missile and defense programs outside the talks, and limiting discussions to nuclear matters only. The negotiations are usually held in neutral countries like Oman and Austria, with the help of mediators. Many countries around the world, especially in Europe, the Middle East, Russia, and China, support these talks because they believe that successful negotiations can bring long-term peace, stability, and security to the region and the world. If negotiations between Iran and the United States fail, the chances of war can increase significantly because there is already a strong atmosphere of mistrust, sanctions, military pressure, and political tension between the two countries. History shows that when diplomatic channels are closed, the risk of conflict rises, especially in a sensitive region like the Middle East, which is already affected by wars, rivalries, and armed groups. Any major conflict in this region would not remain limited to just two countries, but would affect the entire world. First, regarding the chances of war, it is important to understand that failure of talks can lead to rapid escalation. The United States may impose even stricter sanctions on Iran, while Iran may accelerate its nuclear program in response. Both sides could increase military activities, issue stronger threats, and carry out shows of force. The risk of confrontation in the Persian Gulf would rise, especially between American naval forces and Iranian units. Airspace violations, cyber attacks, and small military incidents could quickly turn into a large-scale conflict. In addition, Iran's allied groups in different parts of the Middle East might attack U.S. interests or its allies, which could widen the war. Therefore, if negotiations collapse, the probability of military conflict becomes much higher. If war actually breaks out, the consequences would be extremely serious. The first and most direct impact would be on regional stability. Countries such as Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and the Gulf states could be affected. Israel might also become involved, making the situation even more dangerous. Millions of people could be displaced, humanitarian crises could emerge, and basic services like electricity, water, healthcare, and education could collapse in many areas. The entire Middle East could face long-term instability. One of the biggest global impacts of such a war would be on oil prices. Iran is located near the Strait of Hormuz, a critical maritime route through which nearly 20% of the world's oil supply passes. If this route becomes unsafe or is blocked during a conflict, global oil supplies would be disrupted. As a result, oil prices would rise sharply. For example, if oil is around $80 per barrel today, it could rise to $120 or even $150 during a war. This would make fuel, transportation, electricity, and industrial production much more expensive worldwide. Higher oil prices would directly increase inflation. When fuel becomes costly, transportation and manufacturing expenses rise, and companies pass these costs on to consumers. Food, clothing, and daily necessities become more expensive. This can create a new wave of inflation in many countries, especially in developing economies that depend heavily on imported energy. Countries like Pakistan, India, and many African nations would face serious economic pressure. Gold prices would also be strongly affected. During times of war, political uncertainty, and economic crisis, investors look for safe places to store their money. Gold has always been considered a safe haven asset, When fear increases in financial markets, people move their investments from stocks to gold. As a result, gold prices rise rapidly. If gold is around $2,000 per ounce today, it could increase to $2,300 or even $2,500 in a major conflict. In South Asian and Middle Eastern markets, gold prices would also rise sharply. Stock markets usually react negatively to war. When investors sense danger and instability, they become nervous and start selling their shares. This causes markets to fall quickly. Stock exchanges in the United States, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East would likely suffer losses. Sectors such as aviation, tourism, manufacturing, and international trade would be especially affected. If the war continues for a long time, global markets could lose billions of dollars, and some countries might fall into recession. Global trade would also be badly damaged. War would make important shipping routes unsafe, increase insurance costs, and cause delays in deliveries. Imports and exports would slow down, hurting businesses and consumers. Supply chains could be disrupted, leading to shortages of electronics, vehicles, machinery, and other goods. Prices of many products would increase as a result. Politically, global instability would grow. Major powers such as the United States, Russia, China, and European countries might support different sides, turning the conflict into a broader international crisis. Pressure on international institutions like the United Nations would increase. Diplomacy would face serious challenges, and the world could move toward a situation similar to a new Cold War if tensions remain high for a long time. In conclusion, if Iran-US negotiations fail, the risk of war will rise significantly. If war breaks out, its effects will spread across the entire world. Oil prices will increase, gold will become more expensive, stock markets will fall, inflation will rise, and ordinary people will suffer the most. That is why the international community strongly prefers dialogue and diplomacy over conflict. War does not solve problems, it creates new ones. Peaceful negotiations remain the best path toward long-term stability and security for the region and the world.